Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Today, uh, we just got the news that the aircraft carrier USS Kitty Hawk CV-63 is on her way to Brownsville, Texas. They have officially towed her out. There's an article about that in the description below if you want to read more about it. And we posted a video maybe a month or two ago when the news broke that she had been sold to the scrappers. I have a lot of feelings about Kitty Hawk going to the scrappers. She was the last conventionally powered aircraft carrier in service in the United States Navy. And, or at least full-size fleet carrier. Some people might call our amphibious gator freighters carriers. To a European nation, they might be, but to us, they're hardly full warships. We are in one of Battleship New Jersey's fire rooms in front of the ship's boilers. That is the major feature for why I am distressed she's not being saved in some way and is instead being scrapped. A supercarrier is significantly larger even than an Iowa-class battleship. She displaces more. She's over 200 feet longer and over 100 feet wider. This is a big vessel that would be very hard to preserve as a museum ship, but I don't necessarily agree with the government's decision to get rid of her at all. Once upon a time, the United States operated a fleet of 15 supercarriers. Talked about this a lot in the past. Realistically, you only have 1/3 of the number of warships that you have, because at any given time, 1/3 of those ships are able to deploy, 1/3 are down for maintenance, and 1/3 are doing training or on their way to relieve the ship that's deployed. And in the 1980s, it was decided that 15 of these capital ship battle groups were not enough, so the Iowa-class battleships were reactivated to add 2 more. And yet, we now have a U.S. Navy that has dropped to about 10 supercarriers. We've decommissioned the first nuclear carrier Enterprise, and we've decommissioned, with Kitty Hawk's decommissioning back in, was that about 2009 off the top of my head? We are out of conventional carriers. So, not only are we out of conventional carriers, we're out of carriers in the reserve fleet at all. If we went to war today, not only do we not have any additional aircraft carriers to call on, we've got to wait years for the next one to finish construction. And there's only the one slipway to build it, so then we have to wait another half a dozen years for the one after that to finish construction. So if we get into a first-class war like World War II, where you are losing capital ships, we can't replace those losses. And that's what Kitty Hawk represented. Kitty Hawk was in service for a very long time, and at least at the end of her career, she spent a lot of time at Yokosuka, Japan. Why did the United States put our last conventional carrier forward deployed in Japan? Realistically, that is an area where the U.S. sees emerging threats and would want its most modern, most capable warships to be deployed there as a deterrent. And yet we had our oldest active carrier there and the one with the shortest range. Japan is our ally. So Japan is understandably not a fan of nuclear uses in warfare. Even, obviously, the worst case would be that something happens to the reactor and it blows up in a Japanese city, like Yokosuka, where the ship is home ported. But even a slightly better case scenario, the ship goes down in the middle of the ocean. That's still a radiating part of the ocean, and Japan relies heavily on fishing. So they do not, and probably will not ever, have nuclear-powered warships, and they don't like them being stationed there. However, with Kitty Hawk's decommissioning, the aircraft carrier Reagan got put there in her place as the forward-deployed American carrier, the most modern and powerful of the carriers at the time of her commissioning when she was sent out there, and Kitty Hawk was decommissioned. So not only does losing Kitty Hawk represent upsetting one of our biggest allies in the region, it also, like I said before, and most importantly here, it represents that the United States is losing this reserve asset. Sure, Kitty Hawk was 10 or 15 years out of being modernized. She was an old ship, and it would have taken a lot of money to restore her and the other conventional carriers that were still around. And I should mention, Kitty Hawk was one of 4 conventional carriers, and then there was another class of 4 Forrestal carriers before that, and the 2 modernized midways. Those were both old and gone. The Forrestals were kind of obsolete, but the 4 Kitty Hawk class and subclass carriers were pretty comparable to a Nimitz class carrier, especially in an emergency when you just need some power projection asset. I should mention that the other conventional carrier, the East Coast's reserve carrier, the John F. Kennedy, is still in the Philadelphia Navy Yard. It'll probably be a couple of months more before she is towed out for scrapping. So there is still one reserve ship left, but both ships were sold at the same time and will be scrapped within a couple of months of each other. And then the U.S. has no reserve carriers left. And really, the reserve fleet in general doesn't have much left. How big of a deal is that? Well, at the end of World War II, just an absolute ton of ships go into the reserve fleet, including Battleship New Jersey and almost every other battleship in the country. So that's a lot of stuff that we didn't need in peacetime, and that was probably the peak of the reserve fleet. Keeping ships in reserve is as old as navies, basically. Old Greek triremes were pulled up on the beach and roofed over in peacetime. During the Napoleonic Wars, this was called keeping a ship in ordinary. After World War I, the U.S. started the mothballing process with steel-hauled vessels and kept a bunch in reserve. And then at the end of World War II, they did the same thing, which was probably the peak of the U.S. Navy's reserve fleet. And ever since then, it has been declining. If you look at modern times, with the exception of ships like the Iowa-class battleships that get recalled relatively frequently, you don't see all that many ships recalled from reserves. There were a couple of destroyers between World War I and World War II and World War II in the present day that were traded as the ships you were using got worn out. You just pulled another one that was practically brand new out of reserves and used that until it was worn out. But in general, when the first 5 Ticonderoga-class cruisers went into reserves, nothing was done with them. When the Oliver Hazard Perry frigates and the Spruance destroyers went into reserve, nothing happened to them, and they're all but gotten rid of at this point, even though they're relatively modern. It is something of an expense to maintain these ships, and far more of an expense to reactivate them and bring them up to modern standards, but it's much cheaper and faster than building a brand new ship, which is why you see ships like New Jersey brought back 3 times over the course of her career, which might be a record. I've got to look that up, but New Jersey is definitely the exception here and not the rule. Most ships go into the reserve fleet, sit around for 20 years, and then are scrapped. New Jersey is the exception because she is decommissioned, but there is no replacement for her out there. There is no other ship that can provide the sort of naval gunfire support that New Jersey can. And that's how I feel about these super carriers like Kitty Hawk being decommissioned and then scrapped. There isn't another ship like that in reserve. So we are losing a national defense asset. The Iowa class, of course, is turned into museums. And in an emergency, an extreme emergency, the Navy can come back and take these ships over, even though they have had to pay nothing for them. And maybe that could have been done with Kennedy or Kitty Hawk. There were certainly groups that were attempting to save some of these super carriers that have since been scrapped or are on their way to be scrapped. But it's tough to maintain a ship like New Jersey, and it would be an order of magnitude tougher to maintain a larger ship like Kitty Hawk. I'm just really disappointed to see her go. As a kid, I had a model of Kitty Hawk. She's always been one of my favorite carriers. I could never understand why it was the 1960s before we used that name. It seems like the perfect name for a aircraft carrier, and I don't know why it was the 1960s before we used it on a carrier. Kitty Hawk, of course, is where the Wright brothers flew their first aircraft. So, perfect name for a bird farm. I'm surprised with all the Essex-class carriers we were building during World War II, one of them wasn't a Kitty Hawk. She has my favorite name of any museum ship. I also love her nickname, which Libby won't let me say on the video here. The sailors on board her love her, and you often refer to things you love in a derogatory manner. And the people who weren't on her call her that because she was the oldest ship in she was the oldest ship of her type in the fleet. And so I imagine there were some maintenance issues there. This brings up another question. Why does the oldest member of that class get saved the longest? This happens a lot. Like, why is the first one in the class saved longer than the other ones? When Kennedy was the last, she was the most modern as built. She had less steaming miles on her. Why wasn't she saved as the active commission ship? Oftentimes, the first ship in the class gets more yard periods, and so by the time they're looking to decommission a ship in the class, it's the last one in the class that gets scrapped first, because that one was in the best material condition and it didn't get all the upgrades, modernizations, and money spent on it that the others did. We see this with the Essex-class carriers. Lexington is in service the longest. None of the long-hauled Essexes served for as long as the short-hauled Essexes, even though they were more modern. The short hauls get modernized more, and then the money ran out, and they ended up scrapping the others. Congress is looking at getting rid of one of the Nimitz-class aircraft carriers. They're not looking at Nimitz herself, the oldest. They're looking at one of the ones down the line that hasn't been modernized as much. And so that's why you should see ships like New Jersey brought back more than Wisconsin, even though New Jersey has almost twice as much steaming time on her. Why you see ships like Kitty Hawk saved longer than, say, Kennedy. What do you think about Kitty Hawk? Should she be kept in mothballs? Should she have been kept turned into a museum ship? Let us know in the comment section down below. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private institutions and individuals. We really appreciate your support. If you'd like to help us out, there's a link in the description below to donate, or you can help us out by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about our channel. Thanks for watching.